All right, I'm seeing that some people are starting to trickle in, but let's get this kicked off. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Very excited to have you all join us here today. I'm Alex Huang. I'm the Director of Programs and Community Engagement at APAICS, which is the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. For those of you who are a little bit newer to us, like I said, I'm very excited to host today a joint webinar actually with the American University Asian Pacific Islander Alumni Network with the chair, Don Mike Mendoza, who's going to be turning on his camera in just a second. But for those of you who are a little bit newer to APAICS, just to give you a background of us, we are a 26-year-old nonpartisan national nonprofit, and our mission really, we're just dedicated to increasing Asian American and Pacific Islander representation at all levels of the political process. And so that's why I'm excited for tonight's conversation. It features one of our distinguished alumni who went through the APAICS Congressional Fellowship Program. And this series is actually part of a larger APAICS ongoing virtual series for emerging professionals. And so we've hosted a few different discussions with senior congressional staffers, some government affairs professionals. And so now tonight we have this special Alumni in Action edition with Commissioner Sam Cho. And so I'm not going to speak too much more, just want to get to the discussion. Looking forward to it. I'm just glad to have you all join us virtually. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Don Mike.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Hi, everybody. I'm Don Mike Mendoza. I'm the current chair of AU's Asian Pacific Islander Alumni Network. It's such an honor to have this joint event with APAICS. And it's something we've been planning and talking about since July. So it's really exciting that we've got it here. It's come to fruition. And we're able to talk with someone who is AAPI in public service, which is super cool. And somebody who is a joint alum of both places. So just a few reminders, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. And then also, get to know your fellow participants if you'd like in the chat box as well. Obviously, keep your comments and everything that you place in the chat box appropriate to the event and the conversation. So that would be helpful for us. And then without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker today. We're very, very happy to have Sam Cho with us. He is a 2013 graduate of American University. And just a few key points about him from his bio. Sam Cho, he was elected to the Port Commission in 2019. Sam is the son of immigrants from South Korea, and they came to the United States through the Port of Seattle. So it's awesome that he's serving in his town right now. And he's currently the only person of color serving on the commission. So without any further introduction, I'd like to welcome Sam Cho to the conversation today. Sam, here he is.
How is everyone doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm good. Hanging in there, staying quarantined and safe.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And I love to point out that you are repping the swag as a double alumni of, you got the American University sweatshirt on and the APAICS pin.
That's right.
Which is awesome. That's right. I'm glad that you still have that too as well. So why don't we get this kicked off? I know we wanted to talk a lot about, kind of your pathway, the journey to how you got to where you are today and kind of share a little bit about that. But before we get to that, I actually really wanted to start to give our audience and our listeners an idea of your current role. Like, what is it that you do day to day? So can you just tell us like what it is as the, Port Commissioner? What is your role? What are your responsibilities? And what does, if possible, a typical day-to-day look like for you?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, mainly because most people don't know what port commissioners do or what really being a port entity entails. The Port of Seattle specifically is very unique in the sense that it's both a seaport, which is what most people think of when you think of a port, but we also have jurisdiction of the airport. So if anyone has flown into Seattle through SeaTac International Airport, that is actually also managed and run by the Port of Seattle. So as a port commissioner, my job is to set policies and practices within the organization, that dictate the everyday operations of the port. So it could be anything from what is our policy on, biometrics, or what is our policy on face masks, right? During this COVID times, we had to implement a face mask policy at the airport. And then, budget decisions. The Port Commission makes all budget decisions that are above a $300,000 spend. And so we go through an annual budget process, just like any legislature or city council might go through. And then the other thing is, like, we are actually considered a special purpose government, and we are our mission is to promote economic growth and development in the Puget Sound region. And so a lot of the policies that we work on are how is the money being generated at the port being redistributed throughout the region so that it's stimulating that economic growth and development. And so we do a lot of economic development initiative work. And I think during the times of this pandemic and the recession, the work that we're doing right now on that front has become really, really important. And so that's kind of a broader overview of what we do.
Okay, awesome. That helps me too. I mean, I feel like I've known you for a few years now, and have kind of followed your journey through to this position. And it's always good to hear a little bit more. And I think we'll probably have time to talk more about that later. We might have some questions. But let's start with, something that is near and dear to the mission of APAICS, right? Which is getting more representation in public service and just really getting people, because we're finding with our community historically, a lot of APIs, they might not have from an earlier age, kind of like an interest or an awareness of what public service is. Can you talk to us really about how it is that you got interested into it? How did you decide to get into public service? And kind of your route through public service. Originally, I know you've worked for government agencies, you've worked on Capitol Hill, and now you yourself as an elected official.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my entree or my on-ramp into public service really started with community service. When I was younger, my parents emphasized this very strongly. And I remember in middle school and high school, I used to volunteer a lot. And I think that originally stemmed from, my family comes from a very strong Christian background, and I grew up in the church. And so we used to go volunteer a lot at homeless shelters, and I used to go on missions trips and whatnot. And so I think for me, growing up, this idea of giving back, community service, volunteering was very deeply ingrained within me. And then as I went through university at AU, AU's culture is very much, for those who are going through the institution now or went through it, is very much focused on public service. And so that was kind of my first realization that community service can turn into a career. A service can turn into a career in the form of public service. And quite frankly, not even just public service, but like you can do good stuff in the private sector as well. And so this idea of living a lifestyle that, gives back. And I think that's really important for communities like ours, where so many of our first generation elders came here looking for better lives. And I feel like it's part of our jobs to pay it forward in many ways. And so I think there's a lot of elements to why I ended up in public service, but ultimately, I don't think it was like any single moment in my life or career. But it was just like everything kind of just came together in many ways. I actually went to AU thinking I wanted to be a diplomat in going to the Foreign Service, which I know that anyone who's from AU knows that SIS, or if you're an SIS alum, that's kind of like the North Star for a lot of us. And so, we can talk about how my career kind of took a different turn and what my thoughts are on career path. But again, foreign service is another form of public service. So
awesome. So from the AU perspective, my apologies for not mentioning what APIAN does. I'm so excited about this conversation. I just wanted to get right into it. But the Asian Pacific Islander Alumni Network, we're here to bring together alums who identify as Asian American or Pacific Islander into one space to help build a network of alumni that can serve, whether it's in the communities or give back to the university, and also with the overall goal of helping the future generations of AAPI students that will come through the school. We are the youngest affinity group at this moment in time, and so only about we're gonna be 5 years old next year, and so we're excited to have Sam here, and hopefully we have him more involved in the future as well. So speaking of AU, and I know you mentioned a little bit about it already, but can you tell us a little bit about your kind of journey as a student at the school? And so you came in, you said you wanted to be a diplomat. Kind of what was it in your experience that made you kind of make that switch and then, go into kind of the start of your career and where you are now, kind of?
Yeah, excellent question. So I was actually a transfer student into AU. I went to a local university here in Washington State before I transferred into SIS. And, I think that is ironic. I was actually pre-med. So I did what a lot of us do, is the pre-med exit. And the reason I did that was, I was a biological anthropology major my first 2 years in college. I took this class on world affairs. I think it was like global affairs or something like that. And I realized that, there was so much happening in the world that I didn't understand. At the time, the Arab Spring was happening, and Egypt had just was going through this revolution with Morsi. And like, I remember like just reading the news and thinking, man, I have no idea what's going on. And it was just fascinating to me. And so I started taking more classes, and I realized, man, this is what I really want to do. And so I transferred into AU. I went straight into SIS, and I was like gung ho about going to the foreign service, becoming a foreign. I was a total, wonk. In the foreign policy realm, my concentration was East Asia, international economic relations. I interned in the economic section of the Korean embassy. Went through all the typical motions of kind of what you would do at AU. Ironically, I didn't actually intern on Capitol Hill. And then what's cool is, and I think this is one of the other questions, like the benefit of going and being at AU, as everyone else tuning in probably knows, is that like you're just so close to all the action, right? Whether it's you go down Mass and Ave, and you're all the think tanks are there, all the embassies are there on Embassy Row, and then you have Brookings and Peterson Institute and all these, and then the State Department and so on and so forth. And so it really provided me with what I consider to be a fast track into the world of foreign policy, diplomacy, international affairs. The other thing that really happened was being a school that's in DC, you get recruited by agencies. And so my junior year at American, the State Department was on campus recruiting for like student program analysts through this program called the SCEP program. It's the Student Career Experience Program. It's since been, now it's called the Pathways Program. But back then it was called the SCEP program. I'm starting to age myself here. And this was a program that allowed students to work part-time in the State Department as analysts while they're still finishing up the degree. So starting the summer after my junior year, I was actually a student analyst at the State Department, working full-time during the summers, doing about 20 hours a week in the school year. And that was kind of my foot in the door into the State Department. And I thought to myself, well, I'm on my way to, becoming that Foreign Service officer that I wanted. There's something called the Mustang program at the State Department that kind of allows you to fast track into the Foreign Service. So I thought I had everything planned, all right? And everything was rosy. And then at a certain point while working at the State Department, I came to this realization that this wasn't the path that I maybe want to go as far as the career in Foreign Service is concerned, or even quite frankly, staying at the State Department. And I'm happy to dig deeper into why that realization happened and what happened during that course. But I actually ended up leaving the State Department after I graduated. I didn't convert to full-time career, which is what the SCEP program allowed you to do. I ended up going to grad school. So I went straight to the London School of Economics, got a master's degree, applied for the APAICS program from there.
Yeah, that's kind of leading into where I was going to take this, and just kind of like, how did you come to that? And if you wanted to dig deeper into that kind of realization, but how does, help us connect those dots from, you went from this career path towards going to LSE, right? And pursuing that, and then coming back to DC, and of all things, working on Capitol Hill, through the APAICS fellowship program. Can you walk us through that too? And maybe like, especially, I was going to say, especially for our audience members who may be thinking, especially if we have AU students, who will be watching this thinking like that this is one set path that they might want to take, what is it that they need to consider possibly if they're going to go along that, winding route?
Yeah. So this is a broader point I'll make later, but I really don't like the term career path because it's so like, it sounds so fixed. but we
Should
can
I call
talk
it a journey?
yeah,
Or a
yeah. I mean,
career?
yeah, I'll go into that
We can work on, what do we
later.
call it?
But let me connect the dots here because it's actually very interesting. My internship at the Korean embassy turned out to be a tremendously huge influence on me. I was talking to a Korean diplomat during lunch. He just like one day this diplomat took me out to lunch, and we were having this great conversation. And in the middle of the lunch, he asked me, "Well, Sam, like you're a year out from graduation, and that dreaded question, what do you want to do when you graduate?" And me and my naivete and my idealism told him, I responded, well, I want to work for the United Nations one day, right? Which is like a pretty prototypical like SIS answer, right? I want to work at the UN. And the guy actually gave me this blank stare and he said, you didn't answer my question. And I said, what do you mean? I just told you I want to work at the UN. And his response was, I didn't ask you where you wanted to work. I asked you what you wanted to do. And that was so profound. That like, whoa, right? And I think that especially when you live and go to school in an area like DC, where like when you meet someone, the first thing they ask you is like, where do you work, right? Whereas like here in the West Coast or in Seattle, it's a lot like what do you do? And I think this distinction is so overlooked that we often get distracted by, oh, I want to work at the State Department. I want to work at the UN. I want to go to the White House, right? I want to work on Capitol Hill. That we forget to ask ourselves, what exactly is it that we want to do? And the excellent point this guy made to me, and he goes, Sam, the janitor at the UN works at the UN too. Would you do that job? And I was like, would you scrub toilets at the UN? I was like, well, I mean, I'd prefer to have like a, different job than that, right? He goes, exactly.
Good point.
So that was his point. He was saying, working at the UN, it's all good, that's a great place to work. And there's nothing wrong with working at the UN, but what you need to first understand is what you want to do at the UN, what you want to do at the World Bank, what you want to do at the State Department. And that is what guides your path or your direction, as I prefer to put it, right? And ultimately could lead to those places. And so when I heard that, I thought to myself, well, I'm already at the State Department. Do I like what I'm doing? And I came to the realization that I actually don't like what I'm doing at the State Department. I was in the FOIA office, the Freedom of Information Act office. I was in this cubicle in a blacked out room with no windows. You had to punch a code every time you get into the office. You had to leave your phone outside the office, and it was like a secure room. And I would sit there and I would look at classified documents and I'd be the guy redacting stuff that can't go out in public for security concerns. And I thought to myself, I can't do this for years and years and years. So that's what the impetus and the genesis was for my decision to leave the State Department and actually go to grad school. Part of what the SCEP program and the Pathways program does is that if you convert to career from that program, you have to commit to being in that position for some time. And you can't do these lateral transfers that you would want to do from one department to another or one bureau to another bureau. So I knew that if I had converted to career, that I would be stuck in that crap job for a few years. And so I said, you know what, I should just go get and what I really wanted to do is work on foreign policy, like true foreign policy, right? And be in that realm. And so what I did is like, if I truly want to do this, I need a higher degree. I need to get my grad degree. Went to LSE, got it in 1 year, came back, applied for the APAICS fellowship. And I got really lucky because Alex, you're also an APAICS fellow and we were in the same office. Congressman Barra was looking for a foreign affairs fellow. He was looking for someone who can help him with the foreign affairs committee. And it was just a perfect match. And I don't think I would have ended up on Capitol Hill if it wasn't for that specific opportunity to work on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So that's kind of how the dots connect.
Awesome.
So our next question kind of is more of like a high level, broader question about kind of your experiences. And so as somebody who now is in public service, is an Asian American person who is in public service, tell us about kind of, or not rather, not tell us, but give us your thoughts on Asian representation in public service, whether it be in your own city or kind of across the board. Tell us how you're feeling about that, especially given the circumstances in the country right now with kind of racial recognition of what's happening in America. Talk to us a little bit about that and how you feel about that.
That's a very diplomatic way of putting it. So what's interesting here is that I was very blessed and fortunate to grow up in a state that had the very first AAPI governor in our history, right? Gary Locke in the 90s and the early 2000s was the first Chinese American and also just, I think, AAPI executive on the state level. I believe that's true. I don't know of any other governor that came before Gary Locke that's AAPI. And so for me, as an elementary school, middle school student, seeing Gary Locke in office, I think planted many seeds in my head that, that guys like me that look like us could run for office someday and all that stuff. But with that said, I will say that there are three things in life that my mom told me never to do. One was drugs, the second one was gamble, and the third one was politics. And I think this is an experience that is very prevalent within AAPI communities, especially those who came here from the experience of communist regimes or dictatorships. A lot of the Vietnamese Americans who fled the communist regimes, Chinese Americans, Korean Americans who came from authoritarian regimes, Cambodians, etc. And so, a lot of times our first generation parents are very wary of going into politics. It's just not something that is actively promoted within our community as we grow up. But with that said, I will say that I think there is this huge wave of AAPI representation that's just about to break out. I would argue has broken out already with just the sheer number of members of we're at a record high in terms of representation in Congress. I think we're probably shattering records when it comes to state and local people running for office. I really do think that our community is stepping up in many ways, in important ways. I also think, however, that we're just not there yet in terms of getting our due in terms of representation. It's no secret that we're the fastest growing demographic in the country. It's no secret that our communities are being targeted in the midst of COVID-19, that the hatred and bigotry has extended towards not just Chinese Americans, but all Asian Americans, because, quite frankly, most people can't tell us apart. And so I think in these times, it's become especially important for us to step up. And one thing that I think we should emphasize here is not just in the electeds world, right? Like we always think about representation in terms of elected officials, which is very important and at the forefront of creating a pipeline and getting people to the top. But there's a lot of appointed positions there too, right? Whether it's land commission or there's a lot of positions there within local and state jurisdictions that allow you to have a voice and be a leader without you necessarily getting into the campaign world of running for office. And so, I do think that there's a lot of momentum in our community. People like Andrew Yang have definitely, broken some ceilings. I would argue that a lot of the people that, Alex, you and I know and have stand on their shoulders, people like Norm Mineta, Mike Honda, Gary Locke, and so many others, have really paved the way for us to kind of break out here.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned some of those influential people who, without them, we stand on their shoulders, and even this organization, APAICS, wouldn't exist without Norm's, contribution as the founder of this organization and the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, our official counterpart on Capitol Hill. And so what you said is very true about so many ways to get involved. And I'm thinking back to when you first started talking, where did your drive for public service come from? It came from community service. And it seems like, you had the support of your family and to always be involved and always, to be, let's say, like more of a change maker in that sense. But you are also right. It is also different than becoming an elected official and running for office. And so I guess, I think we have time to like kind of veer in that direction. And I think curious to really hear about, when did you know that you wanted to run for elected office, and how is it being a first-time candidate through that process? Because it's very different. Because you've done the agencies, you've done Hill, you had a business career, you had your own business.
That's right. And I was an appointee too, so I've been down the road. I don't think there was any point where I decided like I'm going to run for office someday. I think there was a point where I was open to the idea of running for office, right? Like, I never thought myself as being extremely political. I always thought myself more as a policy guy. And so for me, my experience both on Capitol Hill and serving as a special assistant in the Obama administration was always supporting principles, never thinking that I would be one myself. That kind of changed, honestly, when I moved back to Seattle. And part of what I wanted to do is kind of, just actually let's take a step back here and why I moved back to Seattle in the first place. It's like, I served in the
really touch on that. So
So just for the audience's awareness, I served in the Obama administration until the very end. So January 20th, 2017, last day, President Trump is inaugurated. Obama staffers were all pretty much pushed out. And quite frankly, in DC, it was a very tough time if you were an Obama guy, right? Like Trump took office, we didn't have the Senate, we didn't have the House. No one was interested in hiring a blue staffer, especially one with the Obama, label. And so it was tough for me. Like, honestly, I was like out of the job and looking, and I realized, well, maybe this is time for me to go back to my home state, my hometown, and really go into the local scene. I ended up going the more entrepreneurial route and starting this crazy business that worked out for a few years. But what happened was, as I left public service altogether, I left the Obama administration. I was not connected to the political scene at all for about a year or 2 years. And I was solely focused on my business endeavor, and for me, I thought I was done. I said, okay, I'm done. Like, this is ridiculous. I was a little jaded because Trump had won and I was very bitter. And so I said, screw this. I'm just going to go make some money and, do what I want. But I after a while, I realized I had FOMO, and like, I kind of caught the bug again. And so I started working in the state Senate here in Washington, which is part-time, like a lot of state legislatures. And I kind of caught the bug again. The only time, and then what happened was the incumbent in the seat that I serve in now, the Port Commission seat, announced that she was not running for re-election. And so it was a pretty big deal because the port positions, they don't open up very often. Like, they're pretty, quite honestly, cushy, under the radar. Like, it's not the sexiest thing to run for, right? A port commissioner. And so generally it was like it wasn't really like something that I, thought about. And then what happened was, when this person announced that they were not going to run again, I started getting phone calls from people saying, dude, you're like perfect for this. You should run. And that's when I guess all the seeds that were planted in me between college and that point started to like bloom or whatever. And I started to think, maybe I can run for this. Maybe I should run for this. When I was on Capitol Hill and working for AMI, I did trade policy. I did foreign affairs and defense. I did science and tech. And so a lot of what the port touches us on is trade, science, tech, and international affairs. And then the company that I had started out of the Obama administration was an international exporting business. So there was just a lot of parallels there, and a lot of people encouraged me to run. And so that was kind of like the on-ramp into the idea of, okay, maybe I should run for this. But it wasn't easy. It's definitely not easy.
So building on top of that, I am also a recent alum of APAICS, where I did the Regional Leadership Academy here in Pittsburgh. And it was awesome. That's how I met Alex, and that's part of the reason why we're here today. So we did a lot of learning about kind of the process of running for office, and kind of for Pennsylvania at least, the kind of hoops you have to jump through to get on the ballot and all of that. Talk to us about your process in Washington. For anyone on this call who may be thinking about running for office, I know it may be different because people are in different states, but for Washington and your position, how did that work? What was your experience like? And explain to us kind of your journey to get to the elected seat.
Yeah, I think that first, if anyone is, I think the biggest barrier to running for office is just not knowing how to do it. I think it's the know-how, right? Like when I first contemplated running for office and I like made my decision, okay, I'm gonna run, and then you're like, now what, right? You just have no idea what to do next. And so, the process is actually, like there's like this myth that it's like really hard, and maybe in Washington, because we're so progressive, we make it as easy as possible, and other states are different. But like, I just registered with the Secretary of State before the deadline, and I set up an account with the Public Disclosure Commission, which is where I report all my campaign contributions and stuff like that. And I put out a press release that probably no one read because no one knew who I was. But that's really it. And then you just start telling people that you're a candidate, and obviously there's stuff. So I think from like a administrative standpoint, that's all it takes. Leading up to the administrative stuff, there's a lot of work that goes into standing up your kitchen cabinet, figuring out who's going to help you fundraise, figuring out what your platform is going to be, what's your message, what are you going to tell voters why you're a better candidate than the guy next to you, what are you campaigning on in terms of issues. And so there's a lot of prep work that goes in, and quite frankly, like I think there's like a mental block that you just need to get over at some point. And I think once you're over that hump, like everything becomes like natural, but there is like this mental block of like, oh man, do I really want to do this? In fact, I didn't officially declare my candidacy until the day before the filing deadline. And I almost pulled up, I almost like got cold feet and didn't run. I was kind of dragging my feet on the announcement, and my consultant called me and he goes, look, are you gonna do this or not? And he just point blank just kind of pushed me, and I was like, all right, F it, let's just do it, right? And we ran, and I ran, and we put out the press release. Once the press release out, it's like game on. You can't like retract the press release, right? And so I think that's the toughest part and the hardest part. So yeah, in Washington, that's kind of it. You register with the Secretary of State, you open an account or register with this Public Disclosure Commission, and then you're off to the races.
So I'm going to follow up about that process to there. And then I want to like have you reflect a little bit on the actual campaign itself too. This is a question I love to ask like electeds or people running for office who are in the thick of it. I asked them like, what is it that you wish you knew that now that you've been through the process of a cycle, under your belt, thinking, oh gosh, like wish I had known this either when I had filed, when I had declared, or throughout the process?
Nothing is personal. I'll be honest, like when you run for office, it's very clear who your allies are, who your friends are, and who are not, right? There are people when you float the idea of running for office who will in the background be like, dude, that's such a great idea, you should totally run. And then you run, and then they're not willing to publicly endorse you. They're not willing to put their name next to yours, right? And I think this is especially true when you're, one of the biggest things in campaigning is like who you're endorsed by, right? Whether it's the Democratic Party or progressive organizations like Sierra Club or Washington Conservation Voters. Like there's a lot of organizations like Planned Parenthood and stuff that endorse candidates, obviously. And and the labor unions, which are huge out here in the Pacific Northwest, and elected officials. And when I was running, I knew a lot of elected officials. Like I'd worked in the Senate, and I had their numbers, and I would call senators, House reps, city council members, and a lot of them, while I had good relationships with them, a lot of them weren't willing to go out to, go out on a limb and endorse me in public. Partially because there were other candidates in the race that they also knew, right? So, which is understandable. Like there were 7 candidates in my race, and yeah, it's a primary is 7, and everyone knew somebody. And these electeds are so afraid of pissing off people that they will just stay out of it. And then there's organizations that have pre-existing relationships with electeds. So my point is, the reason I say don't take anything personally is because, like, if you don't get an endorsement, if you don't get the support of somebody or an organization, it's probably not because they don't like you. It's because they're playing the game. And the game is, usually if it's not certain who's going to win, unless it's very clear who the winner is going to be. A lot of organizations don't like to bet on no-name candidates like me who come out of nowhere and run for a county-wide seat, by the way, not just like a district. It's like all of King County. There's a lot of other things that factor into it, like how much money has this guy raised, right? Like you could be the most progressive, you can be the front runner in many aspects, but if they'll look at your filings and say, well, he only has like X amount of dollars, he can't win with that. And then even though they like you, they won't endorse you. Mm-hmm. And so, like, don't take anything personally. Like, this game is like 3-dimensional chess. And then the other thing is, like, learn to forgive and forget. Because after I won, so much of me wanted to be like, hey, remember that time you didn't endorse me?
Yeah.
Right? I wanted to be vindictive and be like, and rub it in their face and be like, when they called me to congratulate me or like, or call me for something, I'd be like, oh, thanks. Next time, don't forget, or like something like that, right? And it's taken me a lot of restraint not to be bitter like that, right? Like just, and so I think going in, and quite frankly, there's some electeds who are very bitter, like who hold it against them and have a long memory. I am not like that. Like I understand. Perhaps if I was in their shoes, I would have done the same thing. In fact, I'm finding myself to be in those shoes because now I am elected and I'm being asked for endorsements. Right? They're like saying, "Will you endorse me?" And now I'm in the opposite seat where I have to figure out, am I going to endorse this person? And what does it mean? What does endorsing this person mean for me? So it's all full circle, right? You might end up being in the same position these guys were in a year ago. So yeah, nothing's personal, and be forgiving, have a short memory.
So you have a knack tonight, Sam, of like preempting questions that we're going to ask. And it's like really crazy, but in the best way. So I was going to...
it makes it easy for us.
Yeah, right. So we're kind of moving into the section where we're going to start taking questions from the audience. And so we've had 2 people ask kind of a similar question. Also, shout out to Ratanj Hans, who's on this call. He is one of the founding members of APAIAN. And so his question, and also Audrey, forgive me if I mispronounce this, but Saima, their questions were both about money and fundraising. So Ratanj asks, how much money does a candidate generally need, and how do you go about getting that money? And then Audrey asks, the same kind of question, where do candidates go to get money, and is it needed for all positions?
Yeah. The amount of money you need for running for office varies based on the office. It really depends on how big the race is. And when I say how big the race, it's like you look at the constituency that will be voting for you. So if you look at a school board race, it's usually small and districted, so it doesn't, require as much money. If it's like a congressional race or a county-wide race like mine was, where it's like over 1 million people who are in the constituency, it takes a lot of money. And so, you can imagine the more geographic space you need to cover, the more resources you need, whether it's like sending out mailers or doing digital ad campaigns or paying for staffers or doing, whatever you need in your campaign plan. It just takes more money because you're covering a bigger base. And so it varies. Congressional races are now in the millions of dollars, right, easily, especially the contentious. It also depends on how contentious the race is. If you're the only guy running in the race, then you probably don't need much money because like who you're running against, right? But if it's like a 7-way race like mine was, and everyone's fighting for that name recognition or that extra vote, a 7-way race is very tough because it's just so spread out, and you're really fighting for recognition. And so it really varies. My race I raised about a little over $140,000, which actually was on the very high side. The average port race is probably between $90,000 to $100,000. But again, this year the race I was in had a lot of candidates in it. There were 7 of us, and then my opponent in the general election was a very well-established, highly recognized gentleman. He was the mayor of a suburb called Bellevue here in Seattle. So he was the former mayor of Bellevue. The establishment knew him very well. And he was a partner at a huge law firm. And so he was raking in a lot of money. So I had to keep up. To get to that second question of how you raise that money, it's a great question. And there's a few ways. First, through personal connections and network. And so one of the first things that you should do before you run, before you ever declare, and before you ever think about running, is figure out what you're thinking about running for, and look at the historical trend of how much it costs to run that race. So you look at previous races and how much those candidates raised. So for instance, when I was thinking about running for the port, I looked at the history of the port races and I said, okay, on average, it costs around $100,000 to run this race. Like that's the average of what candidates, put together. And then you say, okay, can I raise $100,000? So how do you do that? You literally open up an Excel sheet and you go through every contact on Facebook, Instagram, on your phone. You put those names in the Excel sheet. You put down a dollar amount you think you're comfortable asking them for, and then you sum it up at the bottom, right? And I remember thinking I think my sum was like $40,000 initially when I tallied everything up and really stretched how much I think I can raise by calling people just calling my friends on my phone. It was I think it was like $40,000 or $50,000. And then, so that's your base, right? That's how you fundraise. And then you got to obviously get to that 100,000 number. So how do you raise the other 50 and 60, right? That's through true grassroots campaigning, or through what you would call your finance committee, right? Like a group of people you get together who have a very strong network or a strong connections to maybe wealthy individuals or people who are more politically inclined, and you ask them to ask their friends to donate, right? So there's a compounding effect here. If you have 10 friends who can ask 10 friends to donate, that's 100 people that can donate, right? And if they each donate $10 to $100, that's thousands of dollars. So there's a compounding effect here. So I would find 10 or 20 people that I'm very close to who is 100% all in on my campaign and said, okay, Alex and Don Mike, I need you to both call 10 people and get me $100 in donations from each person. That's 20 people donating $100 to my campaign. And so there's like that snowball effect. And so that's kind of how you get it. And then the other thing is organizations. The reason endorsements matter so much is because labor unions, especially, and environmental organizations and organizations that are driven by certain policies like gun responsibility, gun control, or Planned Parenthood on women's health, they all endorse candidates, and they have PACs and C4s that donate to the candidates that they endorse. And so I probably got like close to $20,000 in contributions from labor unions within the Puget Sound region because they endorsed me, and they sent me like $500,000 checks to support my campaign.
And I'm just going to do a quick plug follow-up on that. That is one thing we do at APAICS, is we try to break down the process for people who are like, I think I see something I want to run for. I have no idea how to get there. Don Mike mentioned he participated in one of our regionals. We also have an annual National Leadership Academy where we dive deeper into fundraising, into writing a stump speech, all of that good stuff. So I'd encourage anybody who's interested as well to check out some of the resources we have. We actually do have an intro. It's called Show Me the Money YouTube video on just a very basic intro on fundraising and how you get your foot started in that. And Sam, I think you really touched on that.
Yeah, I went through that National Academy when I was a fellow, and I remember that target where it's like the people and it's every ring is a degree removed from you. And so that's really helpful.
Yeah. So there's that's such a common question and that's what we at our organization work with all the time is, where do I start? So that's what we're trying to do, especially get APIs to think about it.
And I'll just say, like, if you were to ask me what was the worst part about campaigning, it's raising money. By far, it is such an uncomfortable conversation. Growing up, I felt uncomfortable asking my own parents for money, let alone asking strangers for money. It's really weird when you have someone who gives you, like, sometimes I forgot to mention the last way of raising money, which is you just hire a fundraising consultant. And these fundraisers have lists of people who are known to give money and stuff. But that really is like a last resort. I did not hire a fundraiser. I raised $140,000 completely organically, and I didn't use a fundraiser. My opponent did use a fundraiser. The fundraiser route is really awkward because you're literally just given a card with a name and a few some information about the person, and this could be a person you've never talked to in your life, and you'll call them and you'll ask them for money. It's like one of the most awkward, uncomfortable things you'll ever do, and some people are really good at it. Like, some of the people that I've seen are just like so natural at asking people for money. It's just not in my DNA.
I feel like, personally speaking, I think it's also like culturally speaking as well, speaking as a Filipino, like, we don't ask people for money, that's like not our thing. And I know that's a common theme across most Asian cultures, because it's seen as disrespectful, and so I think what's so great about APAICS is that they break down that myth kind of in this arena, that it kind of helps you give yourself permission to have those conversations, and so that's awesome. But there was actually, since we are talking about APAICS, there was a question, and feel free to chime in, Sam, as well. It was, are fellowships at APAICS only for recent grads, or can mid-level professionals apply as well? So I feel like that can be a compound answer from both Alex and Sam about that.
I mean, I'll let Sam speak about it.
For everyone.
Well, I'll give the organizational response about easy answer to that. No, they're not just for recent grads. We do not have a specific requirement about, you must be X amount of years out of school or whatnot, because that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for people who we believe are going to be strong API leaders, and ideally in the field, continue working in the field of public service. We do take people right out of undergrad. We also, for example, in our latest class, we just had somebody who had been in the education field as a teacher for a decade before she decided to do grad school for public policy and enter, into the DC arena. So easy answer, no. And Sam, I mean, if you want to add on top of that, because you yourself.
Oh, yeah, that's a great answer. My class of fellows included someone who came straight out of undergrad and someone who had been working in the DC City Council for several years and wanted to go move up to the federal level. And so, and someone else who was a lawyer for many years at a law firm who wanted to go into the public policy space. So I think it really is. Alex hit it right on the head. It's open for anyone, as far as my experience has been.
And like, to add on to that, I would say that I'm a mid-level professional too, and I jumped in on APAICS when was that? Oh my God, it was like a week before the pandemic, I would say. And I'm 32. So I, heard about the program, wanted to get involved through Ben de Guzman, who probably people on this call know. And, it was an awesome experience. I learned a lot. And so I'm not an elected official, but I am like a state co-chair for Filipino Americans for Biden right now. And I wouldn't have pursued that had I not learned what I learned in APAICS about the process of running for office. So it all makes sense. And
so I will add on to that too is, so if you are interested, once again, doing a nice little plug, we do, like I said, APAICS, we try to serve as the entry point and advancement at all levels. So we have things where people are trying to get their foot in the door on Capitol Hill. We have the training programs that both you, Don Mike, went through our regional one, and Sam, you went through our national one. For people who might want to run for office or for current electeds to run for higher office, we also have all sorts of programs for all sorts of age groups. We actually just launched a high school program just to start to get high schoolers, we piloted it this summer to get them into kind of the public service pipeline as they're looking ahead to what they might want to study if they pursue a higher education degree. So yeah, that's what we do. Trying to get a lot of people into public service here.
Especially APIs. So we have about 9 minutes left in our hour. So before Alex and I give our kind of, I don't want to say stock remarks, but our closing remarks on our two organizations, Sam, we wanted to give you kind of the floor to talk about anything that you think Alex and I hadn't asked you, or anything you'd want to confer upon people on this call. Kind of the specific question being, is there a piece of advice you would give to current students if they're just beginning on their own career journeys or graduate school searches, and especially to graduating seniors who might be on this call, who are just beginning their job search in this really unprecedented time that we're living in right now. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think I want to maybe go back to something I had alluded to earlier in the conversation about my feelings about the term career path.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, the reason I said that is because, I came out of AU thinking I had my path set, and that path was very quickly shattered. If you had asked me 7 years ago when I graduated from AU, if I was going to run for office or if I'd be elected by the age of 30 or 29, I would have laughed at you. And I say that because, my philosophy has kind of shifted in that, I don't think folks should necessarily set paths. I think that people should set directions, and the path will come to you. And what I mean by that is that if your decisions are driven by what you're passionate about and what you want to work on, or what issues you want to work on, I think the opportunities to work on those issues or work at certain places will present themselves naturally. And so instead of planting your flag in the ground and saying, I want to work at the UN, or I want to do this or that, I would encourage kind of the younger professionals or the newly graduating students to kind of keep an open mind. I've seen a lot of people who forego opportunities because it's not exactly in line with what they're thinking about. And I just want to emphasize that, while life is short, you're going to have a long career. And, just because you're not at the perfect landing spot now doesn't mean that there's an eventual path there. As long as whatever opportunity you're presented with is in the same direction as where you're going, I think that, whether you zigzag there, go over, under, or around, like, as long as you're going in the same direction, you'll all end up in the same in the same realm of work. And so, I would just encourage students and young professionals, keep an open mind. I've had people come to me and say, well, Sam, I don't know if this is exactly, this isn't the perfect fit. And I say, well, I mean, is it in the right direction? Is it generally kind of where you want to head? And if so, then maybe it's a good foot in the door, and you're actually way into it. In my experience, I said this earlier, I wanted to be a diplomat. I wanted to go into foreign service. I'm not a diplomat and I'm not in the foreign service, but I'm very much happy with the work that I'm doing right now in international trade and foreign affairs. It's tangential. It's very similar in work. The path was just a little different. And quite frankly, I don't think the door to becoming a diplomat someday is closed, right? People like me who are electeds, or, and I don't want to give away too much of my ambitions, but, people have, eventually made it to these positions, and they didn't have to be career foreign service, right? And so, just be open-minded and have that, and be practical. Nothing is going to happen overnight. It happens over a long period of time. And so I feel like we live in a society where like social media and all this stuff, the instant gratification, we need to find success right away. We need to be exactly where we are or where we want to be right away. And quite frankly, that's just not how life is. You don't succeed overnight. It takes time. And so whatever your definition of that success is, just remember that, sometimes you zigzag, or sometimes you need to step back, take a step back to take 2 steps forward. A lot of people, when I went to the state Senate and worked for a state senator, they said, why would you go from working for a member of Congress and a president to working for a state senator? To them, that didn't make any sense. Like, Sam, you just took like 10 steps back. Well, guess what? Working for a state senator allowed me to make relationships with other senators and other representatives that helped me when I ran for office. So when I ran for office, I could call those senators and representatives that I had relationships with now. And then I took 20 steps forward, right? So just because something doesn't seem like a straight line doesn't necessarily mean that it won't ultimately catapult you to the next huge, big break, right? Sometimes you take a step back, take a look at the broader picture, and take 4 steps forward. And so that's my advice. Just stay nimble and agile in your career. And I think in the end, as long as you hustle and work hard, you'll end up on top. That was a really long.
That's great. I mean,
Great, yeah.
I'd rather you be as detailed as you need to be than, so cool. Well, thank you, Sam. Like, we really appreciate your time today and being here with us. Is there, and I'll ask the question for anybody on the call, is there a way, like, how can people get in touch with your office, say they want to connect with you later? How could they do that?
Yeah, folks are more than welcome to email me. My port email is cho.s@portseattle.org. Or, I'm on social media. Sam H. Cho is my Instagram. Sam Cho Tweets is my Twitter handle. I'm pretty active on both. LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn, Sam H. Cho. But yeah, if you DM me, I'll get back to you eventually. No promises of instant response, but I'll get back to you eventually.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks again. It's always great having known you, and from when we were in DC to now having you being elected, and now that I'm on the APAICS side of things as well too, having you as an alum of our programs is great. And just thanks for all that advice. You are going to have me kind of workshopping, the pathways. Not to really go on a tangent here, but when you're talking about how people help plant the seeds for what you ended up doing later in life, I was like, maybe we should call this a career garden or something. But
okay.
we can work. I think that's a work in progress at the moment.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to both of you, Don, Mike, and Alex, for having me. This was like 2 worlds colliding for me, AU and APAICS, and so this was fun. And I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Sam, and also thank you, Don, Mike, with APIAN at AU for joining us. And for anybody who is interested, like I said, apaics.org has all of those great programs, that's benefited tons of AAPIs, some who you see on this call today too, who, we just are trying to get more representation in public service.
And if you happen to be an AU alum as well on this call, the Asian Pacific Islander Alumni Network is always looking for new members who are AU alums to join us and get involved. We have events coming up. We've got a women's an event, hopefully with the Women's Network at AU in November, and hopefully an event in December that connects with current students about their plans in 2021. Hopefully that means post-pandemic. But we're always looking for alums to get involved. The biggest project we're working on right now is endowing the APIAN Book Award for future and current AAPI students to help them with their costs for books. Just to give a quick update about that for anybody who may be curious, we have to reach a minimum goal of $5,000 to start giving out the award. And we're right at like 4,600 right now. So AU alums and actually anybody who's willing to support young AAPI students at American University, please support if you can. We would be very appreciative. You can learn more about us and what we're doing on the american.edu website, on the Alumni Association page, or on Facebook, the Asian Pacific Islander Alumni Network. Definitely like our page. We're very proud of it. It's new. And so we hope to see you at another event, and hopefully there'll be more places like tonight where we can partner with other organizations like APAICS to bring people like Sam in front of you to talk about their experiences. So without any more, thank you so much for being here, and we hope you join us next time.
Thanks all.